Hello and welcome to the EIC Clearly podcast. EIC Clearly? See what I did there? This is the podcast that brings you in-depth discussions with energy, policy and thought leaders on the most critical issues, trends and innovations shaping the global energy supply chain. Hello everybody, it's Stuart Broadley here from the EIC and welcome to another EIC Clearly podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to Lara Naqushbandi, who is founder and CEO of ET Fuels, a brilliant British startup business.
We're actually Irish.
Why are you actually Irish?
Well, interestingly, we were 3 UK founders. And when we started, we thought the UK is doing nothing in e-fuels. Europe's driving all the demand. We should be a European company. And so we thought, what's the closest European company to being British? And hence we're Irish. Actually, though, roundabout way, we actually think now the UK is probably the most exciting place for e-fuels, but we can talk about that.
Fantastic. I'm definitely leaving that in. So ET Fuels is focusing basically on decarbonising hard-to-abate transport sectors, all hard-to-abate transport sectors, and we're going to talk about that, but certainly shipping and aviation. The company is developing at scale to decarbonise with a portfolio of industrial-scale e-fuels projects across the US and Europe, with deep experience that comes from Lara's background in infrastructure, capital strategy, and scaling global operations. So a little bit on Lara. Before founding ET Fuels, she served on the Google UK Exco, both as UK CFO and UK Sustainability Lead. Looking forward to hearing about that, what you took from Google. She also delivered multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects leading global teams as a senior executive at Rio Tinto, and financed them as a private equity investor and at Goldman Sachs. Also, on top of everything else, Lara is a NED at Molten Ventures, a FTSE-listed VC firm, and advises a range of high-growth companies at the intersection of energy, technology, and infrastructure. I don't know how you find the time. Lara, welcome to EIC's London office, and so nice to see you. How are you?
Very well, Stuart. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited. I'm a big fan of e-fuels and eSAF and methanol. So I'm really pleased that you agreed to come along and explain your business, Irish business, and what you do, and how excited are you around the future for e-fuels, particularly for hard-to-abate industries like transport. But before we get into that, let's go back to where it all started for you. And I've sort of gave a little light touch here on some of the amazing things you've done in your career already. But what were the most formative steps for you to get to where you are today as a founder?
I'm not a typical founder, as you can see from my CV, which is filled with very risk-averse, big corporate names. And I'm a finance person, so even more risk-averse on the risk-averse big corporate names. My background, as you pointed out, has always been finance, whether it's been in banking, whether it's been at a corporate, whether that's been in private equity or as a CFO for Google UK. But it's been quite diverse in terms of the industries that I've looked at. So the first probably 3 quarters were all in commodities. And I've always loved the commodities industry because, I mean, as you know, you've got this amazing mix of geopolitics, technology, building things, and that's always been exciting to me. However, after doing commodities for about 15 years, I thought, you know what, this is just cost cutting. Because at the end of the day, commodities is all about where are you on the cost curve? And as a CFO, there's a lot of cost cutting involved in getting there. And I thought, I want to do something that's more innovative and more growth focused. And I was lucky enough to get the gig at Google, which was completely different. I mean, there was, just a very, very different world.
Do you mean by that culturally a very different world?
I think a couple of things. For sure, culturally.
What is the culture at Google?
It's very inclusive and very innovative. And you have to deal with a huge amount of uncertainty. So when they hire you, they deliberately interview for a thing which they called googliness, which is basically, can you deal with a whole bunch of chaos and still keep going and not expect everything to be handed to you on a plate? And I've actually always really loved that. I've always found that within change, there's opportunity. And so although moving to the world of advertising and cloud and data was completely different to the world of, mines, ships and trucks, I really liked that element of change. And so I think I wasn't intending to co-found a startup, but I guess now I reflect on the last 4 years of doing this, it's been quite valuable to have the sort of discipline I've had from blue chip, large scale, engineering focused company like Rio Tinto, safety first, operational excellence and rigor, but then matching that with learnings from a company which is, hands down the most innovative company in the world, arguably, and figuring out how do you lead teams under uncertainty. How do you, at Google, they used to have this concept called 10 times thinking. And it's the idea that if you just look for incremental change, you never really achieve much, because to get that 3%, 4%, 5%, you're just taking existing structures and doing them slightly better. Whereas if you go for 10 times change, you fundamentally rethink how structures are set up, and you attract brilliant people who are inspired by that kind of a vision. And I've tried to marry that, what it takes to innovate and forge pathways in sectors that haven't yet been created, with that discipline that you need to build a large infrastructure project at a place like Rio Tinto.
Do you see yourself then, if you look back as to what were the formative things? Was it the finance, as in, even when we were planning on this, you described yourself as a bean counter. You don't seem like what I would say is a bean counter. Are you an infrastructure person? Are you an innovator, a disruptor? Or are you one of those unusual people that is a bit of everything?
No, I'm very proudly finance. I've dabbled in and out of green stuff throughout my career. On one hand, I was involved in the very early stages of the carbon trading markets. And then I flipped from that into working for a family office called Klesch, who basically bought fifth quartile oil refineries and turned them around, right? So I've been on both sides. And what's been just, I guess, a core philosophy for me is that change doesn't happen unless there's an economic incentive. And so, yeah, we all want to do green stuff and help the world, but unless there's a way for companies and shareholders and lenders to make money, you're not going to see that change. It's been one of my philosophies. And so I say that, I'm a risk averse. I'm not really a founder archetype, but that's been quite core to how we've approached things at ET Fuels, because ultimately the make or break is, can you get these projects financed? And so, we've always come at this from, what will it take for someone to invest in this as a really solid business? And so that's been our...
Do you think founders don't like risk, or you think that they love risk, or where are they on the journey? Because different founders, I think, have different views on that.
Well, no, I think founders are very comfortable with risk. So I'm a finance person, but I don't mind risk, right? It's a question of what's your risk-adjusted return at the end of the day. Of course, if you don't take risk, you don't get any reward.
So you lean into the risk, but you put finance around it to understand it.
Yeah, I think so. To put it another way, I guess when we started ET Fuels, we could see there was a very, very clear demand signal, and there was effectively no supply. So point number one was, okay, we're going to see a supply-demand crunch at a very clearly defined time. And then the second thing that was kind of a given for us was, based on how we're going to produce, we're going to be 30 to 40 to 50% cheaper than the competition. So we knew those two truths, and those two truths gave us sort of the foundation to then go into this world of first of a kind, new technologies, never seen before markets. And so I guess when I say I looked at it from a finance perspective, I always thought, is there a reason for this company to exist? Is it providing value to customers? And are we ultimately going to get paid for that value? And that was always kind of the thesis behind starting the idea, if that makes sense.
So founders, are they in it for the money? What drives you?
Oh, well, I can't talk for all founders. I think having met a lot of them now, maybe it's not the right thing to say, but I think it's a deep sense of insecurity, Stuart, bluntly. I'm sure we all hide it very well. But I don't know, I think as a founder, you're creating something from nothing, right? And so you clearly have some underlying issue that suggests you have something to prove and some chip on your shoulder. I have plenty of those, which I know this is not about my childhood and all of that, but I think you do have to have a certain amount of energy to kind of blast through. And I remember I read somewhere that when you're working in a large corporate to get something done, you just need to make sure that nobody says no. But when you're working in a startup or a scale up, you just need one yes. And it's that persistence and resilience that I think is kind of key to being a successful founder.
So is the advice to people out there that are thinking of being a founder to just try it? Or because most people, I think, are too scared or feel that they haven't yet had that idea.
Every person's situation is different. I am a risk-averse person. When I co-founded ET Fuels, I'd had a solid career doing other stuff. So I knew there was always other things I could do. But at the same time, I left an incredibly well-paying job at Google at probably the peak of my earnings in terms of, timing. But for me, this is an amazing opportunity and I have to give it a go because I just thought the opportunity was too compelling to leave it on the table.
So let's talk about the amazing opportunity. ET Fuels, tell us about it. When did you start it up? How do you start up a business?
So we started it in 2022. I was working at Google at the time and I was running sustainability for Google. And I had hired a consulting firm to help us lay out Google's sustainability strategy in the UK. And the company I hired, one of the lead consultant on there, was working on a whole bunch of other decarbonisation projects, including in the hydrogen space. And it was he, my co-founder, and other co-founder, Anthony and Felix, they came up with the idea of starting an e-fuels business. And the genesis of it was the guys had done a lot of work with large industrials, big energy companies, utilities and developers on how do we get ready for all the decarbonisation regulation that's coming and take advantage of all this excitement that's happening in hydrogen. And at the time, a lot of the European legislation that's now in place today to decarbonise shipping and aviation was in draft, but you could see it was coming. And I guess the guys could see that and they thought that everybody was doing hydrogen the wrong way, and we can get onto that. They came up with a novel way to approach it. And while I was working at Google, they basically approached me and said, look, you've done a lot of large infrastructure, you've done a lot of finance, the shipping sector. I used to be the CFO at Rio of our shipping business, which was one of the largest Cape-sized businesses in the world. So they thought I had sort of skill sets that could be helpful in this venture. How did we start it? Well, we quit our jobs. And actually the first thing we did was try to figure out how do we get our hands on feedstock? Because feedstock is the number one thing that you need to make a successful project. So, I mean, we had no idea what we were doing back in the early days, but we got that right. And so, yeah, we were running around Spain and Finland trying to find power and CO2 as a starting point.
So you didn't have any contracts?
No.
As in customer contracts?
We didn't, but that's a point I forgot to mention. We always like to say that we started the business the day that Maersk came out and said they were going to buy, I think it was 10 methanol dual-fueled vessels, because we didn't have contracts, but that was a really compelling customer demand signal for us. And so that gave us the confidence to think, well, there is going to be demand for this fuel. Of course, the regulation is in draft, but if one of the largest shipping companies in the world is taking these kind of quite significant capital allocation decisions, that was a really positive signal for the industry more broadly.
So let's just do a quick idiot's guide for those listening in who may not really understand what is e-fuel, how do you make e-fuel, why is it different from other types of fuels?
Yeah. So stepping back, shipping, aviation, the only way you can really decarbonise those sectors is by changing fuel. You can do some energy efficiency things around the corners, but it doesn't make much of a difference. It's really fuel switch that's important. Now, there are two types of green fuel. One type are called biofuels, and they are effectively produced by biomass type feedstock sources, used cooking oil, for example, ethanol, for example, etc. The other type is e-fuels, and e-fuels are produced by using renewable electricity. You use that to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. You take the hydrogen and you can combine it with, you can either use it on its own or you can combine it with other gases and components to make hydrogen derivatives. The difference between the two, so today, biofuels are cheaper. So if you're looking for that quick and relatively cheap decarb pathway, biofuels, give or take, can reduce your emissions by 50 to 70%, roughly. But the challenge with biofuels is, A, you can't get really to zero emissions for the most part. But most importantly, they compete with food. And so food and forests. And so the feedstock to supply them is incredibly limited if you want to use sustainable sources. And so really, to achieve zero emissions at scale, you need to use e-fuels.
What this means is the largest source of biofuel, biomass or feedstock would have to be agriculture-based. So you'd have to grow it to then create the biofuel.
Yeah.
And that's why it's competing with food.
Yeah, exactly. So you think about things like palm oil, right? I mean, generally, nobody wants to incentivize deforestation so that we can put palm oil into ships and airplanes.
Yeah, but the important thing is, I think maybe some people are thinking like it's great that we're recycling our waste.
Yeah.
And that's the feedstock. But there's nowhere near enough waste, is there, to provide all the jet fuel and the marine diesel and so on?
Nowhere near. And one of the stats I always like to use is if you took the used cooking oil out of all the McDonald's in the UK, I'm sure you've heard me maybe say this, but
I've tried to eat as much McDonald's as I can, but I can't keep up with the demand.
No, sadly not. Sadly not. All of that cooking oil, you wouldn't have enough to power one ship for a year. And so...
Say that again. So all the cooking oil out of...
In the UK...
From all sources.
From all the McDonald's.
From all the McDonald's. Wouldn't even power one ship sort of large container type vessel.
Yeah, for a year.
Wow.
So, and you have to think about the challenges in collecting it. And one of the biggest sort of misnomers that I've seen, and it's changing now because customers are realizing, but when we started in 2021, 2022, in the shipping space, everybody was convinced that they would just use biofuels to decarbonise. And we asked them, well, everybody else's strategy seems to be to use biofuels. There's less than 200,000 tonnes being used today. You're going to need 5 million tonnes. And biofuels as a supply source has only ever grown at 4 to 5% over the last 10 to 15 years. And that's effectively not because it's been demand constrained, but because there just hasn't been the supply. You roll on today, and I think most customers realise in the shipping space that there just aren't enough molecules, biofuels to get their hands on. And then in the aviation space, you've seen huge price increases in sustainable aviation fuel, biofuels, because of course, all the airlines are trying to comply with these new regulations and they just can't get their hands on the feedstock.
If you're enjoying this podcast and think you have an inspiring story to tell, contact me, Stuart Broadley, directly, as I would love to do a sea-level podcast with you too. EIC is proud to be the UK's largest membership energy trade association and the 5th largest in the world. We are unique around the world for 3 reasons. We are truly energy agnostic, believing all energy technologies are vital to delivering energy security, affordability and a just transition. We are the only energy trade association anywhere in the world that offers a truly in-house one-stop shop for market intelligence, networks and events to help our members export, diversify and grow. And we are proud to be the voice of the energy supply chain, advocating for the 5 golden rules of a healthy energy supply chain. More details on EIC membership, the 5 golden rules, details about doing a future podcast with me, and how to contact us about anything else are in the description for this podcast. Isn't there a history of biofuels in Brazil where the majority of their cars used to be fueled by biomass that was grown, and then, as you say, the competition with food and basically land use and deforestation pressures meant that they had to completely reverse their policies. I think this goes back into the 1970s, if I'm right. I think it was the whole sugarcane-based ethanol fuel program.
I have no idea about Brazilian 1970s policies. But
I guess it's the point that this has happened before. And to your point, the competition with food is very real, not just food, but also the pressure to deforest. So I think your point is well made, which is there's the recycling aspects of waste, which only accounts for 1% or 2% of total global demand, even just for jet fuel. So it's not the solution. It's just not the solution.
It's not. And I think what we are seeing, I'm glad to say I was not alive in the 1970s. I'm sure you wouldn't have assumed that. But even today, what we are seeing, Stuart, is a lot of press around companies importing fake biofuels from the Far East, claiming it's compliant biofuels, but actually it's palm oil. And these are, reputable European companies that have been accused of doing this, right? And that's incredibly detrimental to customers who are looking to portray themselves as doing good deeds in the decarbonisation space. And it's detrimental, I suppose, in terms of, the risk around that as well.
So therefore, e-fuels is required. So we're using water as the source, as the feedstock.
Water and sun and wind.
And renewable power, electrolysis.
Yeah.
Okay, so how's your business doing today? So it started up in 2022. So here we are really having this conversation in 2026. How are things going?
Well, we've had lots of twists and turns and heart attacks and celebrations. But I think where we sit today, we've actually got a really solid base to meet the customer demand that we always foresaw in 2030. So we have 4 advanced projects. Two are in the US, in Texas, which we think today at least is the best place on the planet to make these kinds of e-fuels.
Why?
Feedstock. So ultimately, e-fuels are commodities. And so back to what I was saying about my days at Rio Tinto, the winners in e-fuels are always going to be the projects that are at the bottom of the cost curve. Now, 70% of your cost to make an e-fuel is the cost of the power. So you have to go to where the power is cheap. And Texas has some of the strongest wind speeds globally. So, you're talking sort of 9-10 meter per second, which is phenomenal. The second feedstock you need to make e-methanol is CO2. And the US has huge amounts of biogenic or compliant CO2. There's sort of 60 million tons from the paper industry, the same again, roughly from the ethanol industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so the feedstock advantage compounded by the ease of building things in Texas.
And the incredible low cost of energy.
Well, exactly. And then on top of that, you've got some really exciting tax credit incentives, which again are just unmatched anywhere else in the world.
And those have not been stopped by the current administration?
They were constrained. So July last year, Trump basically tightened the window within which you could apply for them. So advanced projects, which were well mature, would qualify, such as ours. But if you were just starting, you wouldn't want to do that. So there's that time-bound window, which is exciting.
So this is, you had to have a project with a shovel in the ground.
Well, yeah, exactly. So we actually started our groundworks in February this year. So we have our shovels in the ground. The shovels have been digging. We now have foundations ready for our wind farms. But we had the confidence to do that because we'd been developing for 3 years prior. So we're in Texas. We've got a project in Finland. Again, the same reason. Great power, great CO2 sources. And then we have a project in the UK as well, which is a methanol to jet eSAF facility.
Brilliant. How are these funded? Where's the demand coming from? And how important is government subsidies and regulation to these projects coming to fruition? And I suppose the ultimate question is, where are we on the cost competitiveness curve?
Okay, lots of questions within the question. So we're private equity backed. We are predominantly funded by a French infrastructure fund called Swen Capital. That is the bulk of our funding. We have, however, received government grants from the UK government, Department for Transport. We were fortunate to get the largest UK government grant for a methanol to jet facility last year, so that was good. And we also have received a 118 million euro Finnish government grant for our Finnish project. So there's a mix of private funding and government funding. Look, the cost delta between these fuels and regular jet fuel or fuel oil for ships is, depending on the project, anywhere between 4 to 8 times more expensive to use these fuels.
That sounds like a lot, but to me, in this first-of-a-kind technology, these first-of-a-kind projects, anywhere in the world, unless you go back to Brazil in the 70s, doesn't seem that bad, given the massive cost reduction we've seen in renewable technologies, in battery technologies over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So it sounds very hopeful.
Well, I say 3 things. One is, when you look at the regulation that's already here, and I'll use shipping as an example, if you just continue in Europe using fuel oil, your fuel costs will increase by 55% by 2030. So actually, for companies who are impacted by that regulation, even at these very high e-fuel costs, you're still making money relative to paying the penalty. So that's number one. The second thing I would say is you don't need to switch out your entire fuel stack to make quite a significant dent in your emissions. Really, what you're doing is blending. So, maybe you put 2% of eSAF into your overall aviation fuel mix. The increment is tiny. And then look, the third thing is, as you said, Stuart, the cost out in these technologies is going to be on a really, really steep learning curve. The one caveat I say to that is a lot of customers say, well, why don't we just wait until, the costs all come crashing down and things will be so much cheaper? That is true, but fails to recognize that actually the subsidies and incentives for early movers actually outweigh, or at least will outweigh for the first 5 to 7 years, the cost reductions from technology improvement. And just to give you a data point on that, because people say, well, how can that be true? Our US project that will be making e-methanol has a $1.5 billion tax credit. we can improve the technology and, de-risk this and that with our second project, but we're not saving $1.5 billion on the second project. And so I think the devil is really getting into the detail and finding which are the most cost competitive projects. And also, as a customer, how do I try and secure future rights? Because we know that the companies bringing the first projects to market will be the ones that have the efficiencies for the second and the third.
Okay. Markets that are most exciting for you.
We picked methanol because actually it has a number of exciting end markets. The most obvious one is shipping, where you already have the regulation in place. Companies are paying penalties today.
And this is European penalties. Of course, one of the things that the Trump administration did is they delayed the decision on the IMO regulation, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think the IMO, everyone has their personal opinions. We've never based our business case on the IMO. It's always been based on FuelEU Maritime. And even when the IMO looked hopeful, we always felt it was more of a 2040 onwards game. So great for the planet, great for the industry, but not that exciting for us as a business. So yes, very much for us, we are targeting e-methanol into ships that are doing European voyages. And look, there are maybe, there's 50,000 tons max of e-methanol being produced today. And there are 400 ships that are capable of taking it. There's a lot of space there in terms of supply demand. So that's one target market. The second thing you can do with methanol, though, is you can convert it into jet fuel. And aviation is also impacted by both EU and UK regulation. Very punitive. There are e-fuels quotas. And so we're very excited about that market. Those penalties start to kick in 2028. So again, that same sort of late 20s, early 2030s timeline. And just more recently, Germany last week came out with its red transposition plan. And there's been a lot of talk about methanol into gasoline in order for German companies to meet those red targets. So it's a very versatile molecule that has a lot of different
And that's
uses.
road transport.
That's correct. Yeah. You can actually use it in refineries or in road transport. So different end uses.
So for people listening in, when you're talking about the regulations really step up and the penalties step up in the kind of 2030 period onwards, does that mean your opportunity only really starts then? Or actually you're dealing here with the operators of air and maritime transport that have to prepare now in advance for that, and therefore the opportunity is already now?
Yeah. When you look at the regulation, if I take those three, aviation, shipping, and let's call it German red. For shipping, it's really a 2030 story because you have this first period from 2025 to 2029, which is kind of the practice run where the penalties aren't that high. But then from 2030, they really step up. So that's when it starts for shipping. For aviation, it really starts in 2028. And for red compliance, it's kind of here, sooner.
But that's just very recent news, isn't it?
That is recent news. I think the challenge, though, the opportunity for us is driven by our production timeline. So we have a portfolio of some of the most advanced projects globally, and we will not be up and running before the back end of 29, early 2030, because these projects take a hell of a long time.
But these projects that you talked about are all funded and are all in construction.
They are not in construction yet. Our development expenditure is funded. We expect to reach FID, so final investment decision for our first one at the end of this year. And for our second one, sort of the first half of next year. And then after that, they take 3 years to 3.5 years for ESAF to build. So the key really is the offtake. And you can't get the financing until you have the offtake. And of course, the offtake needs to commit many years in advance. Now, we had some good news at the start of this year, which is that we got the world's first long-term fixed price e-methanol offtake. And that was driven by a shipping company who, like everyone else, could see the regulation is coming in 2030. And like everybody else, could see that these molecules are going to be incredibly scarce and could see that there was money to be made from securing them early.
And this was RF Ocean. And so
correct.
they signed a binding long-term offtake agreement, right?
Yes,
For a fixed
yes.
price from 2030. So that's exactly the sort of deal you need. So
Exactly.
why did they do that? Is it because they want to be themselves early movers, or is it because this is just the first of many and it's inevitable?
Well, I mean, so look, I started this business because I believe it's inevitable. And the reason that they did it, as their CEO said, it wasn't for charity, right? In my old job at Rio Tinto, the last role I had, I was the CFO of our commercial business. And in that role, I was responsible for managing the team that forecast all of our commodities prices. And we had a team of like 35 really smart people in Singapore forecasting what would happen to iron ore and freight prices and oil prices. Generally, that is a really hard thing to do, as you know. In the world of e-methanol and green fuels more broadly, within Europe, it's actually really easy to do. And the reason it's easy to do is because the penalties are fixed. So you know exactly what penalty you're going to pay if you're not complying. And further, the supply is incredibly limited for these green fuels. So you can really build a very clear cost curve because you know what products are there and there aren't that many of them. And when you do that, you conclude, number one, I can figure out my willingness to pay for e-methanol relative to paying the penalty. And number two, you can even run a whole bunch of other scenarios that look at upside opportunities from trading these overcompliance units. And so, some of those scenarios actually have the fuel paying for itself. Like it's a complete slam dunk. So RF Ocean did it because they could see in a base case, in their downside case, they'll be compliant, they'll save a huge amount of money relative to paying the penalty. And in an upside case, they're basically selling the fuel and using it for a profit. It's like the numbers are insane. So that was their motivation. I think the question is, well, why have they done it and no one else? It's a more interesting question. And I would say a couple of things. The first is the industry is moving. So as well as RF Ocean, the thing that we don't talk about as much is all the other customer engagements that we've had. And since the start of the year, we've signed term sheets at significantly higher prices with two very large European shipping companies and term sheets with two Japanese shipping companies. And so I guess while we talk about the headlines with RF Ocean, other customers are moving, just slower because they're large corporates and they have multiple layers to get through. The thing that I find most interesting though, Stuart, is in my old role at Rio, I was also responsible for fuel procurement and freight procurement. And I spent 3 years shouting at our freight team for taking fixed price long-term positions. Why are we taking this exposure? We should stay in line with the market. Nobody should be betting on future price evolution. That's too risky for us. And that's how, shipping companies and airlines have typically bought fuel, right? Short-term spot contracts, because what they're trying to do is manage that market risk. We're in a very different world, or we're moving into a very different world where risk exposures have completely changed. Not from, did I pay more or less for this index fuel, but into, I've got this whacking penalty liability. How am I going to actually meet that? Because that far outweighs anything that I'm doing on the pricing side.
Are you an energy business looking to revisit your strategy? Did you know EIC's Consult team helped 50 businesses last year? How? We helped them with their strategic investment decisions using EIC's award-winning market intelligence and data to provide them with tailored, pragmatic BD strategies, presentations, and reports. It works. Our data and insights have helped customers to confirm their decisions to export, diversify, and grow. Contact us now to learn more about EIC Consult and begin your own journey to smarter decisions. Details in the description below.
So let's try and summarize a bit. So this is a largely European-centered opportunity on a global stage right now, but maybe other regions will catch up.
Yeah, so I would say, a couple of things. When you look at the regulation that's there today, it is there today in Europe. It's in law and it's being enforced and people are paying penalties. However, globally, you're seeing movements towards similar. So the US has low carbon fuel standards within different states. After the IMO collapse, there was a lot of talk about Brazil will have its own system. China will have its own system. Japan is looking at very similar kind of mechanisms for its hard-to-abate transport sectors. So today it is European, but ultimately, unfortunately in shipping, it looks like we're going to likely have fragmented regional and same in aviation. I think the second thing though, and no surprises here, is that increasingly countries are realizing that with what's going on from a geopolitics point of view, forget decarb regulation, it's also about energy security. So one of the things that we've seen unsurprisingly increase in terms of discussion is how do we make sure that we have more of our own renewable, non-fossil reliant type energy sources? And so there's different drivers for what's happening beyond just decarbonisation.
So let's just unpick the energy security piece. So that means domestic sovereign production for those larger markets, like you could imagine a Singapore then, or...
So I think it means two things. I think for some it might mean domestic sovereign, but for others it means not being exposed to oil price shocks. So for example, I mean, you could still produce your e-fuels in places like Spain or Finland or Texas, where the wind is great, the sun is great, and it makes sense to produce them, but you're not going to see the price quintuple overnight because some president somewhere has decided to do something, right? And so, you know, certainly there's a move towards how do I improve my own domestic manufacturing, my own domestic energy security. But I think a lot of it is just trying to get away from that fossil price exposure.
Is it natural, though, that the main maritime shipping hubs, I guess like Dubai, like Singapore and others, those will be the places that seriously think about, do we need domestic fuel production then? Because right now that's not how they think at all.
No, because they're not great. So to make e-fuels, you need large amounts of very windy, sunny land, which Singapore just doesn't have. ARA doesn't have, right? And so those hubs will never be cost-effective places to produce e-fuels. Dubai is a bit different because you've got, of course, the UAE and the solar, but generally the industrial centres are not conducive for e-fuels production because by definition, you want 20,000 acres of really windy land in the middle of nowhere, as opposed to trying to nudge along next to the port of Houston and squeeze in there. And so I think fundamentally...
And access to water.
Yeah, exactly. Well, access to water is key. You need less water than you would think, actually, to make this stuff. But I think fundamentally, there's kind of going to be a shift in energy flows because you're going to have to basically move. What you're really doing is moving wind and solar from windy, sunny places to industrial hubs. And that's kind of the new way that, you know, we're going to see energy flow in the future.
I mean, it's an incredibly exciting market. I love this market. I feel that this market is one of the rare markets, like you said right at the start, where there's more demand than supply. This doesn't have to be pushed along really by regulation, you would say, because already a lot of the shipping companies and aviation companies have their own mandates, whether even before regulation was set that they want to decarbonise over time. And then regulation comes in and further supports it. And that, of course, provides rapid scale-up funding, which is so important. So to me, this is like one of those rare no-brainer markets. And you've got in there, you saw it early. But I bet it's not that simple, is it? I bet there are real challenges that you're facing to get from this hugely exciting, there's more demand than supply, it's the perfect market opportunity. How do you actually get projects to FID?
There are lots of headaches. I would say regulation always helps, right? Because I think, back to my earlier sort of, at least in my head, relying on companies to just do the right thing because it's the right thing only gets you so far. So having very clear demand signals from regulators is very important. And actually, we have that already. So I think in terms of needing new regulation, we don't need it. We've got what we've got. It's good enough and it works. The key is just to keep it. I think in terms of then, what are the actual challenges? People, at least in the industry, they look at it and say, oh, we're not moving, you know, these projects, where are the molecules? This isn't working. And actually, I say there are two things. And then they say, oh, the regulators, it's all the regulators' point. We need regulatory clarity. That's not actually what's going on. The regulation is really clear. As I said, the regulation is punitive enough to incentivize good projects.
In Europe.
In Europe. Yeah, exactly. But even Europe is more than enough for these first projects. What is tough is, number one, these projects take a long time. So bearing in mind that the regulation only really came into force 3 to 4 years ago, and these projects take 7 years to develop, of course, we're not going to see molecules until we've had the time to develop the project. So that's fine and to be expected. I think the second thing, though, is that people misallocate project failure to lack of offtake, when actually, for the most part, project failure is due to bad projects, as we would have in any other industry. And we as an industry have learned a huge amount over the last 5 years. We at ET Fuels have learned a huge amount, you know, of the many projects that we still have. There have been multiples of those which we got wrong. And typically, Stuart, the reason projects don't work is because the feedstock isn't secured, compliant, scalable, or cheap. And then secondly is because you're trying to build them in places that are just not conducive to building stuff. It's no more complicated than that.
And conducive to building stuff, low cost of energy, ready supply of renewable energy, ready supply of water.
Yeah.
And
CO2 as well.
CO2 and some kind of basic infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you know, you look on paper and you think, oh, I should go and build a project in Brazil. But for a first of a kind project, doing that in a place like Brazil, where the logistics aren't as robust as you would have in Texas, where the country risk is higher, that's just risk on risk. So you've seen these early projects happen in places like Texas with Infinium on the ESAF side. Seen it happen with European Energy in Denmark. These are places that you're able to actually get stuff done and build and bring these projects to market instead of risking up from a country perspective as well.
And ET Fuels, of course, is so close now.
We are, yeah. I mean, we're one step away, So we have, for our first 2 projects, basically a project, you can sort of see how mature it is based on 2 things. Well, 3 things really. Of course, the most important is offtake, which we now have for our first e-methanol project. But then the other 2 things are, do you have your feedstock secured, which we do now for all 4 of the projects in our portfolio, and do you have your engineering more detailed? So our first 2 projects, one in the UK and one in Texas, have both completed their Class 3 engineering studies, which involves spending a lot of money on engineering and finding out that the number was what you thought it was. We have completed our Class 3 feeds for both our UK project and our US project. And what that means is that we now have the final step of engineering before we reach FID. Been a long road to get here for the last 5 years, but we're a hop, skip and a jump away.
So how excited should I be, right? So oil and gas industry globally is still a massive industry, hugely profitable, getting some stick, of course. Is this industry, so the biofuel and e-fuel industry, the future oil and gas industry, in scale, in profitability? Because many aspects of its infrastructure, at least at the delivery side, are the same. Okay, on the supply side, totally different. But it feels like this could be a replacement for so many of these oil and gas industries. Is that too simplistic?
I mean, I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, these fuels are ready to use today. You can drop them into existing solutions.
Yeah, so the existing like jet engines, particularly from a blending point of view, just drop it in?
Just drop it in. And I mean, I would say once the infrastructure is in place for this new stuff, the cost of production is 0 because sun doesn't cost anything, wind doesn't cost anything. And so, the challenge is how do you actually build the infrastructure to start for these first of a kind technologies? But once they're in place, as we've seen with power grids, the renewables are cleaning up, right? Significantly cheaper than anything you can get from fossil. There's no reason why the same wouldn't happen for hard-to-abate transport sectors as well.
Let's talk a bit about you. So I'm just so excited with the journey you're on. What's it been like for you as a founder in this e-fuel sector, as a woman leader in energy as well? I don't know whether you get asked that question a lot, but how are you finding it as a leader in this industry? Is it an industry that's respected? Is it easy to raise the money? Is it easy to get heard by policymakers? Just talk us through that.
I've led teams in quite different environments, leading teams at places like Rio Tinto, incredibly different to leading teams at places like Google. But ET Fuels has been quite different to both of those. And the reason it's been different is because to do something like what we're doing, you genuinely need a whole bunch of different skill sets because we are doing behind the meter renewables. So we've got renewables, we've got process, we've got regulation, we've got commercial. And on all 4 of those work streams, we are doing things that have never been done before. And so the kinds of people you need to pull a project like this together, they just have to be phenomenal. They have to be the best in the world at what they do, because otherwise, how can you do it? And so it's been quite a different experience for me. I've led very large teams at Rio and Google. That's all, all fine. But ET Fuels, we're a small team of like highly elite, I was going to say comrades, but that's probably a bit too strong.
But maybe it feels like that.
It does feel a bit like that because everyone's very mission driven, but they've all had incredibly successful executive careers prior. And they all have, very strong views about how things should be done.
Nothing to prove as individuals, but as a team and in this industry, there's still a lot to do.
There's still a lot to do. And I've always really enjoyed, and probably annoys the team too much, probably debate too much. But I grew up in a family of, where debate and argument was encouraged. Like we argue for fun. And so I've really enjoyed the experience of having incredibly smart, motivated, experienced individuals with very different ideas about how things should be done, coming together to try and problem solve how we bring one of these projects to market.
So when you're working with policymakers who are absolutely central to your success right now in the UK and across Europe, what's the one thing you would say you need them to do differently? And what's the one thing you need them to not change?
So I would say in Europe and the UK, policymakers have done a phenomenal job. Policymakers get a lot of stick, but actually they've done a really good job. And I would say the one thing I need them to do is to not do anything because
it's all in place now.
Because it's in place, because it is good enough to incentivize competitive projects. There's not something for everybody, but competitive projects, which are good value for taxpayer money, have the foundations to get finance based on existing regulation. What is the absolute worst for any policy maker to do is to put something in place and then change it, because that completely destroys investor confidence. And so when I say like policymakers don't need to do anything, I literally mean they should not do anything, because changing rules and opening up this and revisiting that just destroys the confidence that we need to bring the money in to build these things.
Are you feeling relatively relaxed? Because the way, when you break it down, the regulatory environment is in place. I guess if you just take ship owner fuel costs in Europe by 2030, they're going to go up by something like 25%, I guess, unless they use e-fuels or a percentage of e-fuels. Is that right? And then it goes up again in 2035. And that's just in Europe. IMO legislation, you would think at some point in the future will then come along as well. And now you've got Germany bringing in their regulation around some forms of road transport and refineries and so on. What did you call it, with red diesel?
The red transposition, Renewable Energy Directive transposition. They love these long names, yeah.
Love it. So the market's coming towards you. There's more demand than supply. The technology is getting more and more affordable and getting scaled. You're sitting in this balance between UK and Europe, which I guess you could call Ireland. So you're well placed. What keeps you up at night? Yeah, how are you feeling about all of this?
Look, the regulations always, since we started the business, has been there. And I guess I've always been relaxed about it because there's so many drivers of demand from different regulatory schemes that if only one of them holds, that'll be more than enough for the entire e-fuels industry. You've got the EU SAF regulation, the UK SAF regulation, the EU maritime regulation, German red transport. There's a million drivers, right? And people say, oh, this one might go. Well, we've got lots of different end markets. And as of today, they're all holding. And in fact, as you said, growing with Germany. So I've always, despite everyone getting the knickers in a twist about the regulation, I've always felt quite relaxed about that because there's just so many different drivers of it. What has been giving me kittens for the last 4 years is, can we put together good projects with good feedstock, good cost structures, reduced site and permitting risk. And I got comfortable with all of this really in March this year, where we had 2 class 3 cost estimates, where basically, having spent loads of money on engineering, we concluded that the cost would be what we thought it was before we started, which on the one hand doesn't sound like much of an achievement, but it's a massive de-risk of a project. And I'd spent...
And back again to your finance background,
exactly.
As you say, if you can manage the risk, then you're not worried about risk.
Well, so I would go even further. I mean, I spent my early career at Rio Tinto. I was doing all the capital allocation policies for the group and writing the reports to tell the board which projects we should invest in and which ones we shouldn't. And I spent 3 years writing post-investment reviews of all the projects that had gone wrong because of this, because of that, because of this, cost blowouts and schedule blowouts. And so when we started ET Fuels, I went into it sort of thinking, whatever we think we start with is going to cost 5 times as much, take 5 times as long, et cetera, et cetera. I was right, it did, but we still have a good business case, and we're now at the point where that's fundamentally de-risked. So I don't get kept up at night by the regulation. In fact, with every passing day, my supply-demand crunch that I'm waiting for in 2030 is just closer and closer. What was worrying me, and will continue to worry me, but worries me a lot less now, is do we have a really robust project? And does what we're doing make sense in terms of the underlying project fundamentals? Because that's what kills these projects. It's not the regulation or the financiers or the off-takers.
So the future, it's coming at you very quickly, isn't it? What does the future hold? What are the key milestones ahead of you?
FID. We are now so close for our first e-methanol project to reaching FID. And so what's on my mind is, how do we make sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's? Because there's going to be a lot of I's and T's to...
And this is the UK project?
This is for the Texas e-methanol project.
That's the first one. When does the UK project get to FID?
So the UK project, we're targeting FID summer next year.
That's summer 2027.
Correct. I can't believe we're in 2027. Exactly. And we've fundamentally de-risked on feedstock and engineering, but there is just a whole bunch more stuff that we need to basically do. The linchpin of which, of course, for our e-methanol project will be filling up the outstanding offtake that we need to close to get to FID. For the UK project, slightly different. The UK project is driven by aviation demand, where we're in good negotiations with some very exciting off-takers on that. But you also have a very exciting potential kicker that the UK government's looking at for ESAF as well, which we're watching closely, called the Revenue Certainty Mechanism, which could effectively provide a government-backed offtake as well. So lots to look out for over the next few months.
The value of this industry must be scaling up. There's a total global, if you would just value the whole e-fuels industry, must be growing quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's exciting about e-fuels is the scalability of it. You know, I never quit Google to do one random plant, right? It was to build a scalable business. And the reason we continue to develop 4 projects instead of just doing one is because there is inherent value in being able to scale and cost out and take the learnings and reapply them. But yeah, I think that the key is to get these first projects across the board, and then, you know, of course, the portfolio can scale from there.
So final thoughts as we wrap up here. I'm always inspired by founders and the way they work. You seem to me someone that is not afraid by what you're going into. In fact, it's all about opportunity. It's just logical, isn't it, from listening to you, that this is going to happen. It has to happen. And you're well positioned for it in a number of parts of the world. Europe is critical. UK is critical. But this is just the beginning. There's more demand than supply. You've already got your first binding off-taker signed up. You've got an FID coming up in 2026 in Texas, an FID coming up 2027, hopefully, in the UK. It's all about to get very serious, isn't it, very quickly. So how would you wrap that up?
I thought you did a good job, Stuart. Look, I think the key for us has been we just have to keep chipping away step by step. You know, it's been a long road to get here. And one of the things that we've always done well at ET Fuels is just keep chipping away amidst all of the uncertainty. And there's a lot of big things that happen, but I think we've prided ourselves on consistent execution. And so that's what we're going to focus on as a team over the next 6 months. We have our list of things we need to do. We have our list of milestones, and we're just going to keep chipping away at them until we get this thing done.
Is your funding model going to change? Do you think you'll go public at some point in the future, or too early to say?
Too early to say.
Okay. Let me know when you do.
Sure thing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lara. That was just a wonderful discussion, and I'm incredibly excited by what you're doing. Best of luck.
Thank you, Stuart. It's been a delight to be on the show.
Thanks, everybody. Well, that's our show for today. A huge shout out to Samara, Lucas and Joao and the rest of our incredible team behind the scenes. This show truly wouldn't happen without them. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean the world if you'd hit that follow button, give a 5-star rating or leave a review. It's the best way to help us keep doing what we love. And as a thank you, I'll leave you with my favourite 5-word joke. Love wind power. Big fan.